Alright, so I've been browsing Twitter to see if there was anything noteworthy going on, when I came across something that's quite honestly left me shocked and baffled at how this even managed to become a problem. Like, I can't see any reason as to why people are freaking out so hard over something so trivial. So, like I said, I was browsing Twitter when I came across this tweet by Nintendo Life, which seemed pretty normal. It was just talking about how there was this game called Sense, a cyberpunk ghost story, which was coming to the Switch. This is a game that, as the name suggests, it is a cyberpunk genre with some horror elements. Quite honestly, this game does look like it has some potential. But looking at this tweet, this just seems to be your standard news post about a game being ported to Switch. So what's the problem here? This seems to be a normal game. This game looks nothing out of the ordinary from hundreds of other games mentioned in Nintendo Life, and everything looks normal. So I am sure that the comments on this will be normal and civil. Let's take a look, shall we? Well, one look at the comments and I regret it instantly. Apparently the game has a problem, and that problem is that the female characters featured are problematic because if you look at them, you notice that they have some massive badonkadonkers, Some of those massive mommy milkers, those giant honkers. To put it shortly, they got big boobs, which was enough to spark an outrage somehow, which is surprising since the characters just look normal, like there's nothing really going on that would even make me do a double take aside from the big boobs, possibly. There's simply just not anything noteworthy to say here. Some comments that people left range from confusing and untrue to just flat out unhinged. Let's view some of these now. First off, we got someone saying how they were 20 years behind the times game wise, but they were disappointed in how Nintendo was licensing products like this. Well, this argument falls apart when, first off, this isn't really an NSFW oriented game, so I don't really see the point in freaking out like this, big boobs aside. Add to the fact that Nintendo has been licensing games that I can say look far more risky than the one people are freaking out about right now. Looking at these, it's obvious that those games are much more sexual than Sense. Overall, it's just starting off light. People aren't really familiar with Nintendo, that's fine, and the criticism is just mild right now, but it slowly takes a turn for the worse. There were also people talking about how Nintendo could show this to children, how this was going to be a bad influence on them. For starters, this game is rated M for mature, which means that it is not something that you would show little Timmy anyways, and there's already a warning label for it. And there are ways to keep tabs on what your child buys for the Nintendo Switch, especially if you have parental controls on, since they can't buy anything without your approval. Like, just monitor your damn kids and stop asking other people to do your job. You're the parent here, not the developers of the game. If your kids or you decide to disregard the label and get the game anyways, that's really a you problem. There are people who also claim that the game is hypersexual and that it distorts reality and that the bodies are gross and representative of the male fantasy, essentially saying that this game is for incels, just pulling the classic males draw highly sexual drawings to appeal to the male demographic argument. My only response is, WTF are people smoking? How can people even claim that the characters are hypersexual? They're literally just wearing regular clothing and posing normally. Just because they have massive milkers doesn't mean that they are hypersexual, as boobs are not sexual by themselves. These characters are just standing there doing absolutely nothing, and people are already freaking out. And how does this even distort reality, as in real life people can have these proportions, and even though you can argue that they are unlikely, they still exist, and demanding that people just censor and remove these designs only serves to degrade these people and make them feel like their body type is invalid and undeserving of respect/representation. The incel argument is also dumb as fuck because the artists who designed the characters are married, and one of them is a woman, which doesn't really fit the definition of an incel. Honestly, at this point, incel is just a buzzword that people only use to mean a person they don't like. The word itself doesn't even mean what it was originally supposed to mean, which was involuntary celibate. People just ran the word incel into the ground like they did with simp. It lost all meaning. And 90% of the time, people who do use that word don't have any good arguments, they just name call. And to be frank, judging from some of these comments, some of these women just seem a bit jealous about the fictional character and are just projecting their insecurities way too hard based on some of these comments that I'm seeing. Some additional arguments were the fact that people were saying that the body type is harmful to other women, presumably due to the fact that it is unrealistic, which doesn't even make sense because, as I've said before, women are capable of having said unrealistic body types and they can't help being like that. And to say that it is harmful to other women is quite honestly insulting and implies that those women are shit for being how they are. And for the part where it apparently hurts other women, like people are gonna go out after playing the game and hurt women on the street, how? No sane person is going to play the game and then decide to go out and harass women because they don't look like some fictional characters. And the people who do that, they're already mentally unstable and we're probably already going to do it anyways. These women are not real, and trying to compare them to most of the general population isn't really ideal anyways. Point being, don't compare yourself to fictional characters. And before you go running your mouth to me about small girls seeing this and being insecure in themselves, it's rated M, so you already have to be over 18 to play, so people like that shouldn't even be playing this anyways. It got to the point where Top Hat Studios, the publisher of Sense, released a statement where they said that they were not changing designs despite all the criticism, because let's face it, people aren't criticizing. They're nagging / demanding change through Outrage because the game has something that they don't like in it, and they're not even giving constructive criticism and just giving flat out wrong info about the game. Like, if you don't like the character designs and don't want to buy the game, that's fine. Just ignore it. All the complaints about the game are practically non-existent issues because people can't learn to ignore minor issues like how the characters look. I have yet to see one real criticism of the game that just isn't people complaining about how the characters have large tits. Now, when all of this was going on, people started to question the validity of the threats and criticism of the game, saying how this was just manufactured outrage and how this was just a marketing ploy for easy sales and reviews, which doesn't really make sense as the game came out 5 months ago, meaning that the game would have already had the reviews already set, and since the game already came out, there's not really point for marketing a game released 5 months ago. One notable example is when this individual who insisted that this was all made up and that no one was really saying anything bad about women's body and just bluntly lying through their teeth. They say that these were all just troll accounts. That fact is not real, especially when I checked the profiles of some of these people complaining about the game, and they seemed like legitimate accounts / high-ranking game journalists. Then they tried to pivot by saying that there were no screenshots, which is incredibly funny considering the mountains of evidence that have been piled up, which I will show later, and they also tried to claim that this whole drama was fake. Now, while I can understand why people can be skeptical of things, especially when they're online where people are not as forthcoming with information at times, I am confused as to why people are so questioning of this particular event and are willing to just blindly believe it when other developers post a small handful of death threats or don't even show any, and people just mass defend the game and assume that anyone who doesn't like it is in the same category as those people who send death threats. Like when the developers from The Last of Us 2 were complaining about death threats, which to be clear, no one should get any, and if you send any, you are a shitty person. The point I am making is that when mainstay AAA game devs complain about death threats and don't give evidence or minimal proof, and people rush to their defense, while an indie game does something that steps out of line, aka not progressive, and they get piled on with threats and people blatantly look the other way and gaslight about the threats. Unfortunately for all of these people who claim that this was just manufactured outrage / not that serious, Top Hat Studios released a statement where they say that they originally did not want to make this post as to not incite a search for these posters and cause further fights. However, as there are now industry adjacent people slandering / gaslighting us as liars, we've compiled a sampling from Twitter, Facebook, and email. Now, let's read some of these extremely valid criticisms of the game that I found to be interesting. Starting off, we got, how many fucking real, actual women do you have on your team? Any? Even one? Don't fucking count. You have no idea how much I want you to hurt right now. Stupid fucking garbage incel BS you're peddling. Hope you get the rope. Is your address redacted? This is some real shit, and it shows us how much it denigrates women, Lamal. We'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Seriously, so much wrong. These over-sexualized pictures look like kids. Who vetted this? As you can see, these are some very important criticisms of the game and totally not unhinged people who are seconds away from putting holes in their drywall. Like, all you need are some N words, and you could almost pretend that it's an Xbox live chat in 2012. Like, damn, racism and transphobia? Didn't know women could be so based. But for real, hats off to Top Hat for providing receipts and actual evidence of harassment and not BSing it. Here's a little fun fact though. The guy that I talked about earlier who was denying that these threats were even real, he got sent this link and instead they just doubled down and said it was fake, even though it was like really easy to find like outrage about sense. He just wanted to stay on his sinking ship, even though like you could find evidence in like 10 seconds. And even if Top Hat didn't censor the names, they probably would have complained about a game studio harassing over innocent criticism. But honestly, I'm just surprised that left-leaning people and TERFs could finally find something to agree on. But it gets worse. Even after Top Hat Studios posted this, there were people who still didn't believe that it was real or valid. One person posted a statement right after stating how anti-SJWs think that they're the big brain but are one of the most manipulated marks on the planet. Well, it's a good thing that Top Hat didn't make that post for people to buy their game. They made that post to tell people to stop sending the devs death threats, which I would imagine is quite reasonable. But I'm going to keep it a $1.50 though. If you buy a game for no reason other than to own someone or just because it has minorities, you are a dumbass. Like, just get a game if you see it and if it appeals to your taste, not because of some petty reason that doesn't matter. But to focus on the part that says this claim of outrage is just a marketing ploy slash PR stunt to sell this game, Top Hat released a statement where they state that their PR team has been out for the holidays. So the question is how they could have planned this when one of their main teams is out, like the team you think would help with marketing. The fact that they even had to clarify this is just sad, especially when it shows the bias people have for harassment over game design, which really shows in the game journalism. Because something to note about this whole situation was that Top Hat said that they were industry adjacent people who wanted to slander them because of their connections. Like, look at this, man. The people who strongly speak about this and claim that this outreach is fake have connections towards game journalism sites and want to push their agenda instead of stopping harassment by reporting on it. Like, some of the things that they say in their gaming articles are just downright dishonest and trying to downplay all the harassment directed towards the devs. In this first instance, someone claims that when Top Hat released their screenshots showing harassment, that those harassments were really just criticism of the art style and sexualization of the characters. Yeah, because as we all know, death threats and slurs are criticisms and hold important value. Clearly not, like this is just a flat out lie. There's also another instance where a game journalist tried to say that there was no censorship and those claims were just attempts at viral marketing, and they added that nobody asked for it. However, later on when they addressed the death threats and tried and play it off as a couple of guys, which is interesting because judging from all of those screenshots, that is more than a couple of guys. And how they told us earlier that nobody asked for censorship, and now they're just trying to brush it off as, oh, it's just a couple of guys. To that, I only have one question. Would you use the same line of reasoning when someone that they like claims to get death threats? Just brush it off as a couple of guys, it doesn't really matter. And the obvious answer to that is, of course they won't. It would go against their narrative. Honestly, after seeing all of these, I've lost even more hope for gaming journalism than I already have, as it is obvious that instead of chasing the truth and solving problems, they insist on pushing their narratives and blatantly lying, which is why so many people hate gaming journalism as a whole, as they focus more on pushing their agenda. It's just so laughable that gaming journalists cry harassment all the times, and then they try and cover up a studio which documented lots of death threats towards them because it's not the gaming outrage they want, i.e. not the right group getting outraged at games. This whole drama was just so completely pointless, with some of the biggest backlash over something that shouldn't have even generated this much outrage, especially when it's a game that you don't have to buy and can just ignore. Like, this was just real mundane shit. It's an indie game, for crying out loud. The fact that this harassment is also supported by people in the video game industry astounds me, especially when you consider how these journalists complain about harassment themselves. That's all I have to say. See ya.
Oh,